J-Music New Zealand is proud to be bringing L'Arpeggiata on their first tour to this country. They are an amazingly accomplished ensemble. Early music musicians, superb early music exponents, joined on this tour by colleagues who are equally accomplished in the jazz field. And they're going to be doing improvisations on music by the great 17th century composer Henry Purcell. What an extraordinary array of instruments we'll see on stage with L'Arpeggiata. Actually, this is always the case with this ensemble, but particularly so in concerts like the Purcell Music for a While program, where they fuse early music and jazz. For many audience members, the instruments that will seem most familiar are those that contribute to the jazz side of this equation: clarinet, double bass and piano. And of course, there's also some early percussion in there, substituting for the jazz musician's usual kit. But look at all those other fascinating and beautiful artifacts on stage. What role do they play in the magic that is L'Arpeggiata's sound? Combining lots of instruments in the way that we will hear was something that 17th century musicians delighted in. Right at the beginning of the century, an Italian called Agostino Agazzari published a treatise describing how to do it. The way you hear L'Arpeggiata improvising above a bass line is very much in the spirit of what Agazzari was recommending to his readers. Agazzari divided instruments into what he called fundamental and ornamental. These days, we might describe roughly the same grouping as continuo instruments and melodic instruments. The word continuo perhaps needs some explaining. Throughout the Baroque era, that is basically from Monteverdi through to Bach, having an instrument or instruments that could define the bass line and then also let us hear the harmonies that that bass line implies, that was considered fundamental to musical composition and performance. If we go back to the picture of L'Arpeggiata, we see the continuo instruments mostly on the left and melodic instruments on the right. So let's take a look first at the continuo instruments, those that play the bass line and bring out its harmonic implications. The most familiar of these is, I expect, the harpsichord on the very left of the picture. It's a remarkably versatile instrument with, as you know, an enormous solo repertoire, but it is superbly able to perform a bass line and create interesting, harmonically rich realizations above that. L'Arpeggiata's musical director, Christina Pluhar, performs on theorbo. This is a bass lute with a beautifully liquid timbre. Its deeper strings, which are not fingered but played only as open strings, are attached to their own special extended neck. The first theorbo ever brought into England was imported after a visit to Italy by the architect Inigo Jones in Shakespeare's time. Customs officers interrogated him because they suspected that this outsized lute must really be some kind of weapon. It's a bit difficult to tell from paintings whether we're looking at a theorbo or an arch lute. They're both bass lutes. They both look quite similar, but they're tuned differently and have slightly different functions. The theorbo has what we call reentrant tuning, the sort of thing you know from the ukulele, my dog has fleas, where the lowest note on the instrument is not the deepest in pitch. In the theorbo's case, because of the absolute sheer length of the strings, the top two strings can't be the highest. So we start off with those bass diapason strings, as they're called, the ones that are attached to their own special neck way down here. And by the time we get to the strings that are actually fingered, the tuning goes like this. So you can hear how those top two strings drop in pitch. On a normal treble lute, if you like, we would expect this. So the theorbo has a melodic and contrapuntal role, where the arch lute, which is tuned simply from top to bottom, is better able to produce full chordal realizations of a bass line. In this picture, lying on the table in front of the theorbo player is a 17th century guitar. This is a much smaller instrument than the guitars we are used to. We can see in Vermeer's painting of a girl playing the guitar that it has only 4 strings, or rather 4 courses of strings. This simply means that there are 2 strings for every note. That's the case with most of these plucked string instruments, in fact. I adore the sound of the baroque guitar in a continuo section. It very quickly reveals its Spanish origins and flair. So, harpsichord, theorbo, arch flute, baroque guitar. That's pretty much the continuo section for l'arpeggiata. And now to the melodic instruments in the ensemble. In l'arpeggiata's Music for a While program, there are 2 singers, and needless to say, they have primacy. I'm very struck by the way the clean sound cultivated by Céline Schiene and Vincenzo Cappuccetto lends itself so well to jazz as it does to early music. These singers are joined by a baroque violin and cornetto. Orazio Gentileschi's painting of a girl playing a lute has a baroque violin in front of her. You can see just that there's a bow tucked under the neck of the instrument, and this bow has a very different shape from that used by modern violinists. So the baroque violin differs from the modern violin in various ways. The most obvious is that it's strung entirely in gut. Well, nearly. The G string, as you might be able to see, is gut with a fine silver winding on it. That was a very new invention in Purcell's time. But that stringing setup, basically gut stringing, gives the violin a particular timbre. There are other things that contribute to that too. Inside the violin, underneath the feet of the bridges here, there's a sound post and a bass bar, and both of those are slightly lighter than on a modern instrument. You can see the fingerboard itself is a little bit shorter than on a modern violin. There's no chin rest here, and no shoulder rest on the back. The chin rest wasn't invented until the early 19th century, and the shoulder rest is really a 20th century invention. These 2 things affect the way that you hold the violin, and consequently the technique and therefore the sound itself. The bow is also very different. Here's a modern bow. Here's one pretty much like the one that l'arpeggiata will be using. You can see that the top bow, the l'arpeggiata bow if you like, has a stick that curves away from the hair. The band of hair itself is also a little bit more narrow, and you can see that this one lacks the silver clip here that is very important in the modern bow. That clip makes the hair stay as a flat ribbon even when you attack a note at the heel quite strongly. So this one, you've got to treat it differently, and the whole shape means that it's got instinctively different characteristics. Alongside the baroque violin, we have a cornet, or cornetto. This is a very different instrument from the modern one that we call cornet. The cornetto is quite remarkable. It's hollowed out of wood, sometimes with a soft leather covering. Those of you who have ever learned the recorder will see that the arrangement of finger holes is the same. That's the easy bit. The mouthpiece works like that of a trumpet. In the 17th century, it was considered an instrument for virtuosos. You wouldn't believe how many collections of sonatas were described as being for violin or cornetto. The 2 instruments rivaled each other in virtuosity, though of course one went on to an illustrious future, while the other disappeared into obscurity. What a treat it will be to hear Doron Sherwin show us what this instrument is capable of. In this Chaconne by Maurizio Cazzati, we can hear him in dialogue with Veronika Skuplik on baroque violin. The 2 instruments are absolutely equal partners. And how absolutely stimulating it will be to hear all of these instruments, early and modern, celebrating the art of improvisation and teasing out the seemingly endless possibilities of Purcell melodies and bass lines.